for us to go live. Let me ask you one question. When something pops on my WhatsApp and it makes a sound here on my computer, do you hear the sound?
We are live, Ricardo.
We are?
Yeah.
We are.
Oh, yes. Hi, everybody. I'm going to speak in Portuguese to start, and then I'll switch to English to talk to our guests. Boa tarde, pessoal. Estamos começando agora nosso primeiro Conexão Metabooks. Conexão Metabooks é uma série de eventos que vai trazer online convidados de algumas partes do mundo para discutir e trocar ideias sobre o mercado editorial de maneira geral. Nossa live vai ser em inglês, ao vivo, e depois... Live, lógico. E depois a gente vai disponibilizar esse arquivo, essa gravação legendada. So, welcome, Ronald, Edward, and Alexandre. Thank you for joining us. Ronald is the CEO of MVB. MVB is a technology company in Germany, sister company of Frankfurt Book Fair. Brazilians usually know the Frankfurt Book Fair. Many of you may have been there already. He has been the CEO of MVB since 2006. And as under his leadership, MVB has become an international company with business in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Brazil, US, and Mexico. Before MVB, Ronald has worked in strategy consulting for Amazon. Welcome, Ronald.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Edward Navotka is also a very good friend of mine. Ed is the book-selling and international editor of Publishers Weekly and editorial advisor and co-creator of Publishers Weekly Espanol, launching later this year. Previously, he edited Publishing Perspectives, which he also founded. Ed is an international well-known book trade journalist and published essays at home and abroad. His most recent work covered the future of publishing for the Los Angeles Times and the role of literature in U.S. diplomatic relations for the Houston Chronicle. Ed also teaches at the Yale Publishing course. He has also lectured publishing at events in São Paulo, Sharjah, Seoul, and many other places, and he lives in Texas. Welcome, Ed, and thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Alexandre Martins Fontes. He's the CEO of WMF Martins Fontes Publishing House and of bookstore Livraria Martins Fontes Paulista. That was founded by his father, Valdir Martins Fontes, and his uncles, Walter and Valdemar, in 1960. So the bookstore is celebrating 60 years of existence this 2020. Alexandre, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here with all of you.
Good. And I am Ricardo. I'm CEO of Metabooks Brasil. And welcome to everyone watching this live. Let's go to the questions. The idea of this conversation today is ask you guys to tell us a little bit, how is your country? What happened in the last few months and weeks? So my first question is in two parts. Part one, what have you seen in your country until now? And part two, how do you analyze these past events? I don't know who wants to start.
So let me start. I think I'm the bookseller here, so I'll start. As what's happening all over the world, or in most parts of the world, every physical bookshop in Brazil has been closed since mid-March, and it goes without saying that this is, a disaster for the market. It's very tough. It's going to be very tough from now on. I think the year of 2020 is a year that we are going to have to work to survive, but we are going to be talking about this later on. On the other hand, online sales have gone up. In our case, very strongly. I'm going to talk about this as well later. But in very few words, this is how I can resume what's going on. Bookshops are closed. Online sales are up.
Good.
Yeah, we just got in the latest numbers for the lockdown. In Germany, bookshops were closed starting mid-March, and they started opening towards the end of April. So we had a full month of lockdown, and the results are quite surprising in a part. So during April, lockdown month, sales overall were down 50%. But what's surprising is, and of course online sales were up, but what was surprising that sales for local bookshops were only down 30% instead of 50% as a total market. And we saw a lot of creativity in the market. So booksellers, they couldn't open the shops, so they had home delivery of books. They set up pickup places for books in pharmacies or bakeries, which were open during the time. They gave advice over the phone, WhatsApp, text messages, whatever. So it was really surprising, and the local communities supported bookstores quite substantially.
Nice. Ed, how about the US?
Well, in the U.S., it's very similar. We've had the majority of bookstores around the country have been closed for 4 to 6 weeks, and the impact is hard to overstate, because by my estimation, there's probably been close to 7,500 to 8,000 booksellers who've been laid off. That includes the largest bookstore chains, Barnes & Noble, Half Price Books, Books A Million. So that's a lot of work. The bookstores that have been continuing to sell books through this process are doing much the same as Alexandre and Ronald described. They're being very creative, doing curbside pickup, delivering books if they're allowed. There's also been a big movement towards online bookselling, which is something the independent community has largely resisted. Book sales overall are down, but the majority of those sales have been taken out of the market because of the closure of the independent bookstores. Amazon has continued to deliver books, albeit significantly slower than in the past. And some booksellers are finding this as an opportunity to claw back some market share from Amazon. And I will talk more specifically about a institution which was launched almost with luck in January this year, called bookshop.org, which allows any bookstore to sell online very easily, and it returns a fairly good profit margin back to bookstores. And they have proven to be a lifeline for many booksellers through this pandemic period.
Nice, interesting. The three of you spoke about booksellers. but just a little about publishers. Can you go a little bit deep on publishers? What is happening with them, or how are they dealing with this time? I know, Alexandre, you are also a publisher, so maybe you can give us some insights. Ronald is in contact with a lot of them, and Ed is writing about them. So maybe you can give us a few words on that.
Yeah, let me say that, first of all, unfortunately, I still can't hear Ed. You know, I can hear Ronald and I can hear you, Ricardo, but I couldn't hear Ed's answer. But anyway, you can hear me now, right?
Yeah.
Very good. Listen, book publishers, at least in Brazil, depend very much on bookshops, physical bookshops, online bookshops, but physical bookshops for sure. So the situation, the fact that the bookshops are all closed, it hurts the whole industry. So it's tough on everyone involved. From our end, what I can tell you is that we keep on selling to the bookshops that have a strong online operation. To be honest, the month of April was not as bad as I thought it would be, but still, you know, our sales went down. I'm talking about the bookshop here. I mean the publishing house, but our sales went down somewhere around 40 to 50%. This shows you how important physical bookshops are for us.
Yeah.
Situation here is not. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Ronald.
No, the situation in Germany is much the same, and we have the trouble that during lockdown, Amazon was prioritizing over books, so they're ordering from publishers for a period of some 2 weeks. So some publishers had 0 sales for 2 weeks, but overall it wasn't too bad because the drop wasn't in the market wasn't as significant as expected, and now book sales are recovering. So last week was the first week after lockdown, and we were at some 84–85% of compared to the same week last year, which is not perfect. We would have hoped for more, but it's not bad either. But there's another aspect I would like to add or bring to that discussion. It's the aspect of technology, because what we've seen here, especially for publishers, that technology or Corona is a catalyst for new technologies. In the past, so until end of last year, people in publishing houses thought it was essential to have large meetings, face-to-face meetings, be in personal contact. And publishers now learn hardcore that that's not necessary at all. That you can work very, very well without physical publishing houses. Well, we do trade, magazine, not books, but we work completely remotely, and there is no loss in quality in our work. And we will see many more technologies, of which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit later, that are going to use more. So new work is there for publishers.
Yeah. It is changing the way people are looking at the business. And in the US, just to address a question about how publishers are dealing with it, it's right now it's at a standstill because there have not been a lot of new orders from bookstores. Almost all the deliveries are being made through a single distribution channel, Ingram Books, and that's it has been working. There's been a little bit of strain in the supply chain. The big question, to be very honest, I think publishers are worried about, one, they lost several months of launches for new books. And in the United States, with an election coming at the end of this year, a lot of publishers already delayed any significant books to 2021. And since you're seeing books that would have been promoted and published, say, in the beginning of summer, are being pushed towards the end of the year, when a lot of them don't have confidence, unfortunately, that customers are going to have either money or the attention because of the presidential election. There's a lot of insecurity, because the other thing that happens 2 to 3 months down the line is publishers are still being paid for sales that they made over the holidays and Christmas period from bookstores, because the terms tend to be 3 months out. The question is, what's going to happen when August comes and they're expecting checks from the previous 3 months of sales, and what they're not going to get are checks. They're going to get thousands of books returned to their warehouses that went unsold because they no longer are, within that promotion period. So returns is something that I think a lot of booksellers in the U.S. are very fearful of getting waves of at the end of the summer. It's going to be a delayed effect, how it impacts publishers. And I think you're going to see that also with layoffs and lists. And we can go into some detail about that later. I don't mean to be a cynic, but I think you need to look at how the industry works. And it's a delayed industry where the money and the results of financial results don't necessarily hit bank accounts until 3 or 4 months later.
Yeah, you're right. Let me try to summarize what you said too. Alexandre, did you get Ed's answer? No,
unfortunately I didn't.
Okay. Basically, Ed was talking about the problems that are going to come 3 or 4 months after things happen, because it's a market where the bookseller sells, then they receive, then after 2 or 3 months they start paying the publisher, etc. Yes. So it's a chain of events going backwards, let's say. Do you see that? So now we are already changing to the future, but I would like to talk about the near future. So how do you, Alexandre, and the others, how do you see the next few months, the last months of this year? Here in Brazil, we are also going to have elections. It's not for president, but it's for mayors, right? Yeah, for mayors. And so there is some more activities in the second semester. And in the US, as I mentioned, they will have a presidential election. So that will bring some more, I don't know how do you say this, more events happening and diverging the attention of the people. So what do you see for the next months of this year as a publisher or in your other positions?
Yeah. Listen, first of all, in Brazil, we are still not sure when bookshops are going to open again. We don't have an exact date of when this is happening. Obviously, the longer the bookshops are closed, the tougher, it will be for us. The bigger will be the problems we are going to have to face. Again, I briefly mentioned that online sales are strong. We are 100% as booksellers. We are almost 100% focused on our online operation. Just to give you some numbers, in April we had an increase of 175% of our sales, online sales, and now in the first few days of May, our sales are going up 226%. So what I see here is, and I've actually been talking to other people about this. I have an impression that online sales will not necessarily remain in the same level that they are now, but I think that people will get more and more used to online sales. So that's one thing. The problem as far as the market is concerned, and for most book publishers, is, you know, the physical bookshops are very important for you to show the books that are being published, you know, the new titles, and we don't know, as I mentioned, yet, you know, when the bookshops are going to open again, and we don't know how people will behave once the bookshops are open. You know, my guess, although, for instance, I was speaking to Rui from Livraria da Travessa yesterday, and he told me that sales in his bookshop in Lisbon, in Portugal, he opened on Monday, and they are quite strong. Actually, he said that this past Monday, it was the highest sales for one day this year. So the very first day that the market opened. But we don't know, and this could very well happen in Brazil as well, but we don't know if that's gonna last. If I'm gonna guess here, is that obviously sales will not be as strong as they were before the pandemic, before we closed the shops. And let me add one piece of information here. You know, we have a very nice bookshop at Paulista Avenue in São Paulo, which is probably the main avenue in the city. And this bookshop sales have been growing for us steadily in the last 15 years. So although the market in general in Brazil is quite weak, sales for this bookshop, this physical bookshop, have been quite strong for quite some time. I strongly doubt that sales will remain as strong and when we reopen the shop. I hope I'm wrong, but this is my guess. So what I'm thinking here is sales will remain stronger. Online sales will remain stronger, but I think the sales in our physical bookshops will go down. I said this very briefly before, you know, I think we are all here concentrated on surviving, you know, and in my opinion, as far as bookshops are concerned, the very competent bookshops, the organized bookshops, the bookshops that have an online operation, they will obviously do better than others. But just to finish, it's a long, I'm taking too much time, but just to finish, I think that publishers in general, the publishing industry, you know, we strongly need small independent bookshops. And I think that we have to do everything which is in our hands to help these smaller and independent bookshops, which are so important to the market, but not just to the market, to society in general.
Well, I couldn't agree more. It's exactly the experience we've made in the last 2 weeks during lifting of the lockdown. The first week was really strong. Not all bookshops, not all regions were open yet, but in those regions that were open, bookshops had a lot of revenue, a lot of sales. But now the curve seems to flatten a little bit. So the rest of the year is going to be a race to recoup the missing 15-20% from the first 4 months, and it's going to be a tough race. But I would fully agree with what you said, Alessandri. We need small local bookshops, but I think these bookshops have learned something the hard way, though. But they've learned something. They've learned they can compete with Amazon. Before Corona, there was a feeling that, should I really have an online store? I can't compete with Amazon. They're so much better than we are. But the local bookshops combine online offering in whichever format with service offerings like the curbside pickup or home delivery or delivery overnight or whatever. They have a good chance of competing with Amazon and being profitable at the same time.
And on the American side, this is very much the case. The question, of course, survival is very important. And the U.S., among independent stores, about 1/3 of them were already at risk. They were hand-to-mouth bookstores before the pandemic. That's the blunt truth that is sometimes not admitted. Those stores are going to be at risk of closing. Not necessarily in 4 to 6 months, but they look like they're going to be at risk. And that really depends on real estate prices, on the local communities. But there is a chance we may lose 1/3 of the independent stores. Though I think the stores that are going to have the hardest time adapting to this new reality are actually stores like Barnes & Noble, these kind of mid to larger size stores, because you're going to see a transition that's going to limit the amount of people you can have in a given store at a single time. And so the smaller footprint bookstores will have a competitive advantage where you can run them on leaner staffs and you can have maybe fewer people in the store at the time, but people are going to be more comfortable than going into a larger space or a larger store. And that's going to be very interesting because they have Barnes & Noble, our big chain. They've been already moving to smaller stores, but they have a new CEO, James Daunt, who's coming from the UK. And that's going to be very interesting to see how he does it. But again, what Ronald said and what Alessandra said, the indie stores are very important to the health and culture of advancing the culture of a society, which is what I always say bookstores and the role of books play. So we don't want to lose them, and they do have a fighting chance now against Amazon, and they have an opportunity to prove their worth to their local communities. And I think that's the silver lining in all of this. So the ones that are well organized and that can be very creative will have a good shot at surviving and hopefully sustaining themselves for the next generation of readers.
Thank you, you all. I think all of you mentioned the importance of the independent bookstores or small chains. My next question was going to be, or is about, if you all see any particular player emerging stronger from this situation. Do you think the indie bookstores, independent bookstores, or small bookstore chains, could be those who can emerge strong from this situation? And while you were thinking about the answer, let me talk to to the people watching us. If you have questions, you can type on our chat, and we are going to try to answer one or two questions. And one more thing in Portuguese now. Se você se juntou a nós agora no meio dessa live, ela está sendo transmitida em inglês neste momento, e em alguns dias nós vamos disponibilizá-la também legendada, okay? So, going back to the question, do you see any special player in your country or in your region emerging stronger from this situation? Would that be, or could that be, the bookseller, independent booksellers?
Ricardo, let me start the answer saying that a few years ago I read something that went like this. You know, a bookshop, a physical bookshop, an independent bookshop, should offer, in order to compete with Amazon. You mentioned Amazon, so let's talk about Amazon. In order to compete with Amazon, they have to offer everything that Amazon doesn't offer. And that is, you know, a place where people can meet, if possible, an auditorium, a cafe, you know, a place where people can get together and talk about books and literature and feel welcome. And I strongly believe in that. The problem is that right now, none of that is possible. So in my opinion, it is indeed the small independent bookshop. Not just that. I mean, every single physical bookshop in Brazil, for sure, is hurting. And so I think, in my opinion, the bookshops that have an online operation are the ones that are surviving at this point, that are selling at this point, that are seeing some increase in sales, at least in their online operation. And I think that these are the ones who will come out stronger. There is no question. We all know this. Amazon is thriving, you know, not just selling books, but selling all other products. So I unfortunately don't believe that the small independent bookshops will come out stronger, you know, quite the contrary. And this is when I think it's so important that the publishing industry, the industry as a whole, do everything that we have in our hands to support them. You know, I would hate to see, you know, these wonderful independent bookshops with so much soul disappear, you know, but there's no question that they have a very hard challenge ahead of them. We all have, but I would say that the small bookshops with no online operation will suffer more.
I wouldn't fully agree in terms of Amazon thriving. That might be the case overall, but in terms of books, they lost a lot of credit among consumers because they had long delivery times. There was a lot of criticism about working conditions and so forth. We all feared that Amazon was going to be the winner of the crisis, but I would say that's not the case. I don't know the numbers, but from a general feeling, I know very few people, that's anecdotal evidence, but I know very few people who now order books from Amazon. They'd rather go to their local bookshop, and not because I'm telling them to, but on their own. And I think if the local bookshops keep up their offering, their service offering, as I pointed out beforehand, but what you mentioned, Alessandria, as well, once Corona is over or halfway over, they have to be a meeting place for people. They have to be the third place after home and work, where people can exchange and communicate. And I really think that those bookshops will thrive. And if Corona is good for anything, I think it's encouraging booksellers to be more competitive and more self-confident.
Ed, would you like to add something to that?
Of course, absolutely. It's I think it's interesting that Ronald was able to observe that about Amazon, because statistically, the fear is that they were going to suddenly claw more market share away from consumers. And my feeling is still that there's a certain type of consumer who will shop at Amazon, and still a certain type of consumer that shops at independent bookstores. And they are different. The thing is, though, that the type of book buyer who shops in an indie store is probably a little bit better resourced. They have a bit more money than a typical Amazon shopper. They're less of a bargain hunter. They're looking for more of an experience, and they might want that that more curated type of book than the, generally speaking, the mass market type of book that you might go to Amazon for at a deep discount. So I think that you're going to see that market become more prevalent. And again, that's the competitive advantage an indie bookstore can have. It's very interesting, though, right now, because it has leveled the playing field as far as marketing is concerned. And this goes directly to what Metabooks does, both on the bookseller and the publisher side. When every other marketing is done through a screen, the booksellers who have a personal relationship with their consumer, who are friends with them on Facebook, who can run a book group for their local, their local organizations, who have that personal connection, are going to really have a competitive advantage going forward, because we are going to be continuing to socially distance, whether we want to or not. That personal relationship is something that Amazon has actively discouraged. You can't even phone them up to complain when you have a messed up package. It's very difficult. So I think having good, as we described before about online operations, having really good metadata, having really good online marketing, knowing how to do that. And it's not the same one user fit. It's not one size fits all for everybody. If you're in Sao Paulo, it's very different than trying to market to somebody, in say a more rural part of the country. So having all of that, having really good tools, digital tools, and knowing how to use them is going to be a huge advantage. We saw that. So I mentioned, I'll be very quick. I mentioned a new entity called bookshop.org in the United States. It launched in January as a way for independent bookstores to claw back some market share from Amazon. And there was a lot of doubt about its validity, because the fear was it was just going to become another online bookstore that would take books sales away from independent publishers. I encourage everybody to look at bookshop.org, because it allows individuals, even like journalists like myself, book bloggers, and bookstores to set up their own curated bookstores online. And it's proven, they run a ticker at the top to show how much money that their profit they're returning back to independent bookstores. And I believe it's over $1.5 million so far in sales and they're still in beta. So it's very impressive. And it's really been a lifeline, even for bookstores. There was a new bookstore, very briefly, launched exclusively on Bookshop, which is called the Bookstore at the End of the World. And it was created by booksellers who had been laid off from their jobs at some very important bookstores. And they've already done, in the last 2 weeks since launching, $60,000 of sales. Quite impressive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Impressive.
And they have no physical store. Yeah.
Okay. So I have another 2 questions here for you, but we are receiving 2 kinds of questions here that are complementary from people watching us. So I'm trying to share that with you, our guests. Basically, what started this conversation, these questions, was how can we compete? How can a small bookseller compete with Amazon discounts and other big bookstore chains, and the discounts that they offer to the customer, and also the discounts that they have from the publisher, because they buy more, so they have a better discount. They can offer a better price to the customer. So the first question is, how can you compete with this? How the small can compete with that? And then someone brought up the fixed price issue. So we have Ronald from Germany, where they have the fixed price law, and we have Edna Vodka from the US, where they don't have the fixed price law. So maybe you two could give us some views on this, how to compete, and what do you think is the fixed price one of the solutions? Can it be good or not? Whatever.
Can I start?
Well,
Being a bookseller and coming from a country where there's no such law still.
Yep.
I mentioned before that fortunately in the last 15 years sales of our bookshop at Paulista have been going up steadily and strongly. There is no question that that this war on prices and discounts is something that is not good for the market. And I personally, for many years, support a law similar to what you have in Germany. But why are our sales going up? Although we don't offer any special discounts in our shops, and we don't do it basically because we can't afford to do that. If I start selling our books with Amazon discounts, we are going to simply close the shop. So we compete, in my opinion, doing better, and doing better means, trying to have the best selection of books possible, having a bookshop that is well located, that invites people to come in. As I mentioned before, doing everything that Amazon cannot do, offering a space for people to invite people in, but doing well what we try to do, which is sell books. I think that it's a mistake, in my opinion, when the smaller shops, the physical bookshops, the mid-sized shops, try to compete with Amazon, selling books with the same discounts or similar discounts that they sell. That's not the way to go, And I'm very happy to say that our sales have been going up steadily. We have the support of our clients. So I think, again, the way to fight against that is to be even better than they are, or if to say better than they are is maybe pretentious and naive, but doing absolutely the best you can do in order to serve well your clients. And I think there's quite a lot of people that are aware of the importance of the independent bookshops, and these people support, the independent bookshops and bookshops like ours. They want more than just discounts, and this is the people we sell to. Going back to the other question, I just wanted to make this clear. I'm a bookseller. I would say I'm an independent bookseller. I strongly believe in the book market. I strongly believe in bookshops. And particularly bookshops with a soul, bookshops that do well what they try to do. And this is what we've been trying to do, for all of our life. But when I said that, we are the physical bookshops are hurting more, I'm not saying that Amazon will come out of this as the winner, but there's no question that if there's one story to be told here, is that online sales are important, and the small independent bookshops, mid-sized bookshops like ours, should do their best to invest on online sales as well.
Yeah. Well, coming from Germany, I can tell you that the fixed book price is a blessing. If you look at the market share of Amazon and the market share of independent booksellers, you see that roughly half of the sales still go through booksellers, physical bookstores. And Amazon has a market share of something between 15 and 20%. And that's the case more or less in all markets, all mature book markets, where it's a fixed book price. Amazon's market share in non-fixed book price markets is much higher in the US or in the UK, for example. And just to give you some insight how it's working, because I was reading the chat, and there's the question about discounts to consumers, but also the discounts that booksellers get from publishers. And our fixed price law works in both directions. So the publisher sets a price for a book, and the bookseller has to sell at exactly that price. But it also limits the discount the publisher can give to the retailer. It's usually rather the other way around. It limits the discount the retailer can ask from the publisher. So Amazon can't get rich in Germany by selling at a fixed book price and then getting a huge discount from publishers. That thankfully doesn't work.
It's going to be, just to add a little bit, in the US we don't have a fixed book price, but we do have a recommended price that's always printed on the book. And there has been a lot of debate in the bookselling community in the last couple of years about trying to remove that price and letting bookstores pay what the publishers are demanding or asking for, because each of them negotiates their own rate, and then charging what they think is appropriate or that the market can bear. Now that hasn't gotten a lot of traction, but it's certainly been floated. And it was one of the questions that there's a new head of the Booksellers Association in America this year, and she was going to begin raising this issue. To put a little wrinkle in this, in the story about bookstores, one of the things that also has been happening that hasn't been getting as much attention because it's not as feel good a story is that many publishers are amping up and ramping up their own direct to consumer sales during this period. They make twice as much money selling directly to a consumer than they do working through a bookstore. And this is particularly becoming, all of the big 5 publishers in the United States have these direct to consumer options. Now they don't promote them because they've been upsetting bookstores. It's been considered impolite to promote this option, but as booksellers are out of business or they're shut down, you're seeing more and more publishers being a little bit more aggressive in their marketing direct to consumers. In addition, smaller publishers are really taking advantage of this as well. And there's always this kind of karmic balance between how many publishers can sell direct to consumers and how much they need to push sales through the bookstores. And I think as we emerge out of this coronavirus crisis, publishers are going to have developed stronger relationships with their consumers as well, particularly on the smaller publisher side, which is where a lot of independent bookstores thrive. So I think it's going to be a little bit more, there's going to be a lot more options where you can buy your books. And it really depends on what kind of book consumer you are, meaning an Amazon consumer, an independent bookstore consumer, or you have a subscription to a small publishing house that only does LGBTQ translated fiction from Central America, of which you have those publishing houses. So I think we're going to have a lot more options, but I think the scale of everything is going to be more modest.
Ed, you were talking about different options where to sell or where to buy, from the publisher, from the bookstore, some kind of club or whatever. Do you think there are enough customer for each, let's call, sales channel that you mentioned? So we we'll be able to have different channels and sustainable different sales channels?
Yes, absolutely. I 100% do, because I think we as book people, we tend to focus only on literature, but there are still books that are bought. I mean, Brazil for until just recently, door-to-door Avon sales pushed books, right? And that still is part of the market. In the US, you can still buy books. One of the biggest retail chain outlets in the UK for years when they were doing discounting was Tesco's. It was grocery stores. So I think you're seeing a bigger proliferation of outlets, particularly as the books become more and more local and more specialized. So like I said, I don't think that anybody's going to be, you're not going to see huge bookstores open up outside of very, very big cities. But I think that all of these sales channels are emerging. I think you're going to see new sales channels emerge too. China, for example, is a great place to look for experiments. They're much more technologically advanced. They do almost all of their shopping already on their phone. And their online influencers are very, very important to marketing. A woman who would run a group for moms, for example, can sell 750 to 1,000 copies of a book with a single WeChat post. So I think that's one place where you can look for experimentation on online marketing in China. But I think we're going to see more and more of all of these channels opening up. Bookshop, for example, as I mentioned, people aren't talking about it right now, but as an individual, if I do a book review on my own site, say I'm a blogger, say I'm an Instagram influencer, and I want to link to the sale on Bookshop, I will get 30% of that sale back. If I sell you a $10 book because of a blog post I did or a great Instagram post, I'll get $3 for every $10 sold. The profit on that can be quite good. I'm another new sales channel. So I think we're going to see more fragmentation of sales channels.
And what's good for the industry is that a higher number of sales channels usually means more sales. It sounds counterintuitive, but we did some research. When big chains of bookselling chains went out of business, the result was not that people went elsewhere to buy books. So the book sales in this region just dropped. So consumer opted not to buy books because they didn't have the opportunity. So in the other way around, it means that the more sales outlets you have, be it a WeChat group, be it an Instagram followership, be it a street stall, so the greater the opportunity to buy books, the more books you will sell, or we will sell as an industry, which is good.
I would love to go further on this conversation. It's getting really exciting. But we have 1 hour of live to finish, so to work on. So we are on our last 10 minutes because we were late a little bit. So last question, and then you can add to your answer your final thoughts in general. Do you think that at this moment, the result of this situation would be something like making the market more and more global or more local? And how would that happen? And that's the question. And after that, you can add your personal thoughts or last thoughts to our audience.
Ricardo, as you well know, I mean, you're in Brazil. I mean, we've been going through a crisis for quite some time. At least in the last 5 years, we've had a political crisis, an economic crisis. We had a couple of years ago, the crisis represented by, the recuperação judicial of the two main bookshop chains in Brazil. So I think that the industry in Brazil, the book industry, has been facing one crisis after the other. The Brazilian government for some time stopped buying books for certain programs that they bought for decades. So we've been hurting, for quite some time. The crisis is indeed very serious in Brazil. I think that at this point, all we can do, to be honest, is to keep on working very hard to survive, and let's hope that better days will come. So I have a hard time to think of anything more than surviving, And I want to point out once again. I've been talking to a lot of my colleagues and friends in the industry. I think in Brazil, Brazil obviously is very different from Germany, very different from the US, much stronger markets, much more complex. The publishing houses are stronger in every sense. The market is richer. But anyway, I think our big challenge in Brazil is, as a whole, is to try to help, the small independent bookshops, because again, they were already hurting before the coronavirus crisis, and I think the challenge from now on will be a lot stronger. I think our situation is very different from the situation in Germany and in the US. I think we are all hurting, obviously, all over the world, but the situation in Brazil is definitely worse. Having said all that, I'm an optimist. We are working very hard. I gave you some numbers about our online sales. I strongly believe that we will get out of this, and I'm talking about our own bookshops. We'll get out of this stronger. But I won't fool myself. I think that that's not true for the majority of the bookshops around the country, for the majority of the companies, and I think we have no question about that. Big challenges ahead of us.
Yeah. The question about between global and local is always a tricky one when it comes to books, because book publishing is always limited by the language area in a way. So there will always be a Portuguese language market, a German language market, an English language market. But on the other hand, I think after a shock phase, a coronavirus shock phase, globalization of the publishing industry will continue. I think we will enter into a short phase of deglobalization with difficulties in international travel and a lot of anxieties about traveling abroad. But I think that especially the large publishing houses, they will continue to buy local publishers. So we will see bigger and bigger publishing houses, and we will see very small, independent, very agile local publishing houses. I think it'll get more difficult for the medium-sized publishing houses, those who can't go abroad, that don't have the economies of scale to buy other publishing houses or to expand internationally. And I think that's going to be really tricky. So it's I think the market will split in two parts: small, agile, local publishing houses and the big international groups.
Well, from the US side, I can offer a couple of thoughts. There's sort of three things I'll talk about. One is in the international rights marketplace, or in the market overall, just since the coronavirus pandemic started, the world's richest media company became Netflix. And the one interesting thing about Netflix is it's a completely globalized company, and it's giving people the opportunity to enjoy television shows from anywhere in the world, dubbed or translated, with subtitles into languages that they might not speak or have exposure to. So in this period, people are binge watching. For example, it's not on Netflix, but Hulu, another globalized platform. The most popular show and the big hit of the pandemic is likely to be Normal People, which is an Irish novel based on an Irish novel by Sally Rooney. So Netflix is the biggest consumer of intellectual property from books for several years now. I think that is going to help continue to foster the globalized environment for books. But I think that's going to be reinforced in part by our own isolation at home and the need to homeschool people. So the people who are inclined, who may not be otherwise inclined to, say, consume a translated novel or a foreign novel or a novel at all, are going to be consuming book material indirectly as they're looking for more edifying material. BBC documentaries in the United States, for example, Cosmos, which is an adaptation of an old Carl Sagan book for the 21st century. There's a lot of interplay in the intellectual property between streaming, TV, YouTube as well. I think is very important for that, and the book business, which is globalized because of the way we can consume it. I think that's important to keep in mind. And as far as publishing goes, the homeschooling environment that we now find ourselves forced into, I think is very interesting and offers a lot of opportunities both for publishers, because you've seen a huge boom in workbooks, activity books, things to engage children that are not screen-based. But at the same time, educational apps, which were really just a secondary part of the market that a lot of publishers had abandoned. I think people are now suddenly going to be looking towards those as a potential way of educating their children. That's not necessarily a globalized market, but I did an event for the Bologna Book Fair yesterday about app development. And the one thing about apps is you can work with people across the world, and very often you need to work with people in a globalized environment, as developers are based in places like India, Eastern Europe, very, very highly skilled, and they're somewhat more affordable than, say, working with a UK developer. So I think all of those things are going to interplay with our globalized market. I mean, I'm watching my daughter at the moment who's 12. She's bored, and she is creating a piece of abstract art from a kit that I bought at the big bookstore in Berlin probably 4 or 5 years ago. I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's not the KaDeWe, but the one of the big bookstores. I mean, you know the one I'm talking about. Yes.
Dussmann.
And that's correct, Dussmann. That's exactly where I bought it. And so this is the world. If you have people who are inclined to this, I think that they'll. What I'm saying though is I really do think that the predominance of Netflix and streaming in our lives, with those foreign shows pouring into our homes, I think that's going to also create opportunities for publishers, ultimately.
Nice. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Alexandre. Thank you, Ronald. Ronald, it's the right night in Frankfurt.
Yeah.
5 hours ahead of us. Thank you for taking the time. Ed didn't have time to have lunch because it's more or less your lunchtime. But thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Audience.
Thank you.
Obrigado.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We didn't have time to answer every question, but we are going to go back to some issues here.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Ronald, I hope to
Bye-bye.
see you. I hope to see you in São Paulo soon. And Ed, I'm very sorry I couldn't hear you, but I look forward to hearing everything you had to say at Published News website. So I'll do that soon. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Obrigado.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye now.